Welcome to Rooted and Real, 21 minutes of Where Are They Now? A soulful check in with past Be Your Soul guests. It's raw, heart led, and unscripted. Just 21 minutes to reflect on what's changed, what's deepened, and what's still true. Welcome to Rooted and Real, 21 minutes with past Be Your Soul guests to see where they are now with their thoughts on your topic. And I am here with Phoenix.
Hello.
And we talked about grace in the first season.
Yes.
Whenever I had you on, and it was such a beautiful conversation. And so we're going to talk for 21 minutes
Okay.
and see what comes up where
Okay.
you are now. So, where do you think that you've grown, changed, shifted when it comes to grace? I mean,
I think I'm a little more quickly able to identify when I need to practice grace or the situation calls for it.
yeah.
I can notice that a little bit more quickly. Yes. Rather than, 10 days later, oh, I really could have extended some grace here to myself or to that other person.
I think our conversation definitely brought up to me kind of like the fullness of grace and the different ways that it comes forward, because we can obviously, someone makes a mistake and we can go, oh, well, that mistake, I'll give them grace for their mistake. But, you know, uh, I think one of the things that it expands into is like, how do we give grace to jerks? Like, how do we give grace to people who are being that very unskillful version of themselves, and sometimes even choicefully being that unskilled version of themselves? And then where does grace come in there?
That's tough. I was thinking about that line where it's like accountability, how to hold oneself and others accountable. And where can that start to cross the line into being overly critical of somebody,
Right.
and not offering them or oneself grace, and but also being aware of the importance of accountability and not
Right.
letting ourselves or somebody else off the hook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah.
when we think of that, then it's like trying to figure out that careful space between the two, because we don't want to harm ourselves. We don't want to go against our own moral value structures and standards. We don't want to be condoning to something that isn't kind to us. But we also realize, like, what's that saying? Like, I too have been the villain in someone else's story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and if
Yeah.
we can think along those, that kind of like empathetic space of that, then it helps us really tune in to understanding, like, well, in that situation, I would have loved grace, or in that situation, that maybe I was not acting the best version of myself, and I got to learn and change and grow from it. And if we don't give grace, I think what it does is hold people kind of hostage to that time.
Yeah.
Like the judgment of, like, that person is a jerk, and then we don't let them grow or evolve or shift. We might need to be like, I need a minute, I'll give you grace and be understanding, and I need to step away.
Yeah, like over here.
I'll be up here giving you some grace. But also realizing that if we don't do that, then they don't get to grow, they don't get to change, they don't get to shift. We hold them in that space, and then they feel like that they have to hold themselves there too, because that kind of righteous, being right sort of energy comes from having to prove to someone else,
Right.
like, your version. And if we give grace and we say, I don't agree with you, but I'm not gonna hold you, in that space of me feeling some sort of way about that. I'm gonna, maybe you're having a bad day, maybe you're whatever, and just kind of open it up, then it gives them space to grow.
Yeah. So earlier, I was thinking about our topic earlier today, and I was going to my own wounded spaces and realizing that when I'm acting from one of my wounded spaces, that's when I tend to act up or create these situations
Mhm.
where something needs to be mirrored back to me in order for me to see myself and my lesson in that
Yeah.
person
Mhm.
or situation. And so, like meditation, being very clear and understanding, we don't have to be perfectly 100% healed in order to do better,
Exactly.
and that's grace too, I think.
Hmm.
And so when I was looking and saying, okay, well, the more aware I am of my own wounded spaces, the more I may be able to see that that person over there is acting from theirs right now. And
Right.
what they could really benefit from is somebody holding the space of grace for them.
Hmm.
Within certain parameters that's
Exactly.
healthy for everybody. But
Right.
yeah.
And that's, the tool or the important aspect of that, I think, is also what you were saying as far as like giving ourselves grace.
Mhm.
Like if we can understand where we are and how we feel and what's
Mhm.
going on inside of ourselves, it's much easier to see
Yes.
like those things in others and those truths in others. But when we have either an unrealistic view of what we should be, and then just by nature as humans, we should some on someone else,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so I think the whole basis of the podcast is when the one is strengthened, the sum is strengthened.
Yes.
And I think that's what personal grace for ourselves does, is gives us that permission to
Hmm.
to spread it like
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I had a very personal experience where I was not giving myself grace. And things happened. I had a realization under a stressful moment where I'm like, you know what? I deserve this. I've worked hard toward
Mhm.
this. And giving up right now, or stopping this process right now, that's actually that's bigger than just me, because
Mhm.
this is an agreement I went into with other, for in my case it was spirits, but
Mhm.
in the case I made an agreement with myself and some of my spirits. And then I had to have one of those moments where I'm like, okay, am I giving myself grace? Are they giving me grace? Am I giving myself grace? And what is it really about?
Right.
And being able to quiet the mind, quiet the emotions enough to really step back and see, oh, and ultimately by offering myself the space for grace, I decided, you know what, I really need to finish what I started. I
Mhm.
need to, keep my word that I
Right.
made to myself and
Mhm.
these other beings. And the freedom that that gave me, and um the lightness that I felt after making the decision, and then I even noticed things in my life improved
Right.
immediately.
Hmm. And I think it's, the one thing that I was feeling as you were saying that, and and this, I will say, this is my personal experience when it comes to working with higher vibrational beings and
Hmm.
ancestors and deities and such, is that they automatically work in grace.
Hmm.
They automatically see you for what you are. And if you really said, this is the best I have right now,
Hmm.
they accept it. It's when we cheat on ourselves, that's the
Yes.
thing. It's like
Yeah.
when we're letting the ego make the decision,
Yeah.
not the true self. If my true self goes to spirit in an authentic way, spirit is not going to
Right.
expect more from me than what I have in that moment. And that's what really grace is.
Yeah.
It's just saying, like, in this moment, I see you
Hmm.
exactly as you are. And I'm not going to judge or condemn that version of you. Do I
Hmm.
want you better? Yes.
Hmm.
Have I seen you better? Probably.
Hmm.
But in this moment, this is what you have, and I accept that. And that really, I feel like, is like, if we can see ourselves in that spiritual light, in that sacred space of like nothing is perfect, and if you're just bringing your A game, you're bringing the
Hmm.
best you got. Some days it's going to be not very skillful, and other days it's going to be skillful, but that might be the best you got right
Right.
then.
Right.
And then we could see that in
Yeah.
others as well, like,
Yeah.
that might be the best they got right then.
Yeah. The I think sometimes my brain wants to see grace from the perspective of grace is supposed to look nice.
Mm,
And that's not always the case.
it's
Sometimes
true.
grace is really uncomfortable and it doesn't look like how you think it should, or
Right.
how we're told it should present itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's that thing, like, expectations always lead to disappointments. So
Mm-hmm.
if we expect grace has to look a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
it's never going to meet that.
Right.
And then that also brings in that second layer. Like, I think expectations mother is assumption. And when we assume that if I give grace, this is going to happen, or if I assume that, you know, this is going to create that magical outcome that I'm looking for by accepting it exactly as it is in this moment, it might be ugly. It
Right.
might not be beautiful. It
Yeah.
might be needing to make another plan, but
Mm.
like it, that seeing things as they are in this moment and accepting that is just where I am, this is the best I've got, or this is just where they are, this is the best they have.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you choice. Truth brings choice. It gives you choice to be able to make another decision or
Yeah.
to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a beautiful understanding that it
Mm-hmm.
may not be pretty.
Yes.
It may not be what you want.
Right.
It may not even look spiritual in that moment.
Yeah.
But if it's acceptance, it's exactly where you need to be in order to make change.
Yeah. I was doing I'm in herbalism school, so I was doing one of my assignments on healing and working with the skin. And one of the herbs we were discussing does such a good job at healing the surface layer that sometimes it will heal that before the deeper wound gets healed.
Ooh.
And so you have to be really careful with certain herbs. And
Mhm.
this one is one where it's like it may make the surface appear healed and pretty and nice, but there's still a deeper wound that needs to be healed. And that's what has to be addressed first.
Right.
And grace is being willing to look at something like a wound and say, it's not time for it to close up yet. It
Right.
still needs to breathe. It still needs to do, before that veneer happens where everything is just finally sealed up and nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that sacred order is really important. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, it's kind of keeping to tune into that acceptance piece, like, acceptance is between awareness and action.
Mm.
And so we can have an awareness of something and not an acceptance of it. I think a lot of people do that. Grace brings the acceptance by
Yeah.
saying, like, I see this, I accept it just as it is. And then we make the action. If we do awareness, action, that's when we repeat cycles over and over again. We have to learn the lesson again a different way because we never accepted the wound. We never accepted that space. And then it, recycles through our system. So that's a beautiful analogy of, like, we can heal the outside and it can look really pretty, but what's underneath there could still be corrupt if we haven't addressed that deep wound in the spaces.
Yeah.
And to me, grace also says some days I'm ready to address it, and some days not today. And if we make something a job, like, and we, go chugging along about it, trying to force it, force the lesson down the road.
Right.
Like, that's the opposite of grace to me, like a control and judgment of what should be happening. And so I think grace is also a part of just saying, like, you know, maybe not today. Maybe maybe I can only touch it just a very tiny bit today, and tomorrow I'm going to take a big bite out of it. But like Grace says, if I'm doing the best I can, then today it might just be, putting it on the back burner. That might be the most I have.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the other part when we talk about addressing wounds and doing the work. Like, if we create it into a job, then it it becomes
Yeah.
tedious and becomes tiring and it becomes frustrating, and we can't accept it as it
Yeah.
is because we're measuring by some invisible measuring
Yes.
stick.
It can't be so regimented that the joy and the miracle of
Mhm.
that process can't shine forth either,
Right.
you know? Yeah. I think that being able to have the experience and have grace with oneself in something like that healing process, and
Mhm.
looking at us where we are right now and being able to offer grace to others that maybe can't even see that they're in a wounded space,
Right. Right. It's true.
you know, just like, okay, well, yeah.
And that's, Edgar would say, my spiritual hub would say, like,
Hmm.
nobody knows better than spirit.
Hmm.
And that's where, to me, if we can lift our grace up into that divine self, into the sacred space, then it's not my job to say whether you're supposed to learn this lesson or not.
Hmm.
It's not my job to control, what my part in your lesson
Hmm.
is. And that's where grace comes in to say, like, if I'm giving myself and the other person grace, then I'm just staying my sacred self, listening to my heart center, seeing the situation, accepting it as it is with
Hmm.
kindness in this moment.
Yeah.
And little by little, the bird will build its nest. Like, it
Yeah.
will open up for whatever they need, whatever I need. But the divine only knows that. And
Hmm.
we don't know whether, if my sacred self says step away, be kind and step away, that might be what they need, if I'm listening to my sacred
Yeah.
self. If my sacred self says snuggle up to them, and, even if they're kicking and screaming, give them a hug, like, who knows? Maybe I need that, maybe they need
Yeah.
that. And that's also that, like, faith and trust in
Hmm.
grace being a high vibrational
Yeah.
energy that says, like, it's not my ego or my control. It's not your ego or your control. It just
Hmm.
is.
And we have to be attuned to be in the flow of that moment to even
Mm-hmm.
know what steps to take or not take, how to
Exactly.
just be present.
That's
Yeah.
but it takes it back to knowing the self.
Yeah.
Because then we know we're in our sacred self. We're not
Hmm.
in people pleaser. We're not in wounded,
Right.
protective self.
Right.
We just are. We're just in that,
Hmm.
like, high, neutral,
Yeah.
sacred
Yeah.
in those spaces.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things after our talk was, that really connected to me was the thought process of self grace.
Hmm.
And for me, like, self grace really got tricky, in trying to come back to this subject here, because I'm an achiever, like, I like to do things. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And, there are times where I've since, that had to step away from things I really loved, or,
Hmm.
or realize, like, as much as I want this to be that thing, like, it may not be that right now. And that understanding is
Yes.
also the grace of, like, going, like, you know, it's not an or, it's not grace for them or for me. It is
Hmm.
grace for all.
Hmm.
And that may mean, like, letting go of some of those control mechanisms, or that belief that, like, if I'm doing the right thing will happen, which sometimes, but
Yeah.
if it's not supposed to happen, that's what grace
Right.
says.
Right. And that gives us the clue that this is what's supposed, this is where we are regardless.
Right.
So how are we
Exactly.
going to deal with it?
Exactly. Exactly. We could deal with it with kindness, or we could
Yes.
deal with it with judgment. And
Yeah.
grace says we deal with it with kindness.
Hmm.
Then it also allows for that freedom of
Hmm.
growth. If we deal with it with judgment, then we're
Yeah.
going to shame ourselves or create double negative energies like guilt, regret, or remorse.
Hmm.
So if we love it, if we love it in a way that is acceptance,
Yeah.
then it's free, we're free.
Yeah.
The freedom comes in this situation. Do you have anything else that you want to add about grace while we're here?
You know, I think for me, if I can visualize something that really
Yeah.
helps, And so I often will visualize threads or cords, and how am I threading myself or interacting with another person's energy? And, because it will take a different shape if I'm trying to mold a situation, if I'm trying to intervene, if I'm offering support. And so, being not, I guess, a part of being aware of the self and the other person is the energy and how things are actually flowing, and being able to be attuned to that and sensitive to, wait a minute, am I tying knots here?
Right.
Or am I naturally just kind of like flowing with? And that takes practice and sensitivity.
It really does. So, in the sequin work that I do,
Yes.
That speaks volumes to that truth about grace, because you go up and down and up and down, and you use both hands. And so, for me, I go down with my left hand and then pull the needle, but then I use my right hand to gently guide the string as I go back up. And it is that gentle guidance, that grace that I'm giving the string, that ensures that there's not a knot that happens from pulling the thread too quickly and trying to force its way through the cloth. And so, gentle guidance on both sides allows just the right amount of connection. So that's a beautiful analogy.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can visualize that your work now. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, that was 21 amazing minutes. Thank you so much for revisiting with us.
Yes.
And I look forward to all the other conversations we have. I'm going to try and have lots of guests in and repeat those conversations, but I really super appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending these 21 minutes with us. Rooted and Real airs every first Friday exclusively on YouTube. And if you're craving more, the Be Your Soul podcast drops every third Friday, wherever you love to listen. For episodes, updates, and more, visit beyoursoul.org, and we'll see you soon.